Of course. No, we're both survivors. Yeah.
So, ladies and gentlemen, may I now all ask you to be seated? Item number 1, if there are no objections, I propose to adopt the agenda as it stands. Item number 2, our meeting today is as usual being web streamed. We have interpretation in more or less all of our 24 languages. Item number 3, we have minutes to adopt of our meetings on the 16th of October, 18th of November and the 10th of December. If there are no objections from your side, I propose to adopt these minutes without any changes. Item number 4, dear colleagues, first of all, a Happy New Year, all the best for this year 2025. And I would like to welcome all of you to this exchange of views with the new Secretary General of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and that's why, first of all, dear Mark Rutte, a warm welcome to the European Parliament and congratulations for your appointment to this important position in these challenging times. I think I can say on behalf of all our colleagues, we wish you every success in your new role, and we look forward to productively working together with you. We have you today for the first time in your new position here in the European Parliament, and it is a good tradition that the Committees for Foreign Affairs and Security and Defence, together with our Delegation for Relations of the NATO Parliamentary Assembly, welcome the NATO Secretary General. That's why I would also like to welcome you on behalf of the two chairs, and Marie-Agnes Strack-Zimmermann is sitting here with me up front. I will not be long in my introductory remarks because I have been informed that the Secretary General has to leave us at 5:30 because he's flying to Finland, one of our important member states. That's why, without any further ado, to catch up a bit of time, shall I hand over? Yes, Marie-Agnes, yes. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. To make a long story short, great that you are here. I mean, it's a challenge, and this job is really for tough cookies only. So, great. Welcome, and also Happy New Year to all our friends here. And I think we have to start immediately because time is running.
Super. Dear Secretary General, you have the floor for roughly 10 to 15 minutes, and then we'll have an exchange of views.
Thank you so much. And good afternoon, and a very happy New Year to you all. It's great to join you today. And this is for me the first time in this big room after so many years to be back now in the European Parliament. In this particular room, I think I was here once before, 10 or 12 years ago, for a big meeting between the European Council and the European Parliament. So I have some memory of this room, but I didn't realize it was that big and there would be that many members visiting. So thank you all for being here, and thank you very much for inviting me. Madam Chair, Mr. Chair, Marie-Agnes and David. As you know, I am a European through and through, so I feel very much at home here, and it's great to be here, back here in the European Parliament. Since starting my job in October, I've had many meetings with European leaders. I had the pleasure of hosting the President of the European Commission. I had lunch in her office, and then she came for dinner at my residence. I met with the President of the European Council, Antonio Costa, with Kaja Kallas, the EU High Representative, and the European Commissioner for Defence, Kubilius, and I had the honour to participate in the EU Foreign Affairs Council in November. And again, I'm today very happy to meet with you. In the coming months, I intend also to have a somewhat longer meeting with Roberta Metsola, your President, and the heads of the political groups in the European Parliament. And I think this marks the start of a dialogue, but also a continuation of all the efforts to bring NATO and the EU, to bring NATO and the EU closer together. At this particular dangerous time, this particularly dangerous time for security, stepping up of our cooperation, I believe, is essential. Russia's war against Ukraine rages on. At the same time, Russia is accelerating its destabilization campaign against our own countries with cyber attacks, with assassination attempts, acts of sabotage, and more. We used to call this hybrid. I try to get rid of that word hybrid. I would call it a destabilization campaign. And Russia is not alone. It has China, North Korea and Iran by its side. Meanwhile, many other dangers persist, from terrorism to nuclear proliferation, disinformation and, of course, climate change. And I've said it before, and I say it again. I'm deeply concerned about the security situation in Europe. We are not at war, but we are not at peace either. The good news is that we know what to do to protect our people and way of life, now and in the long term. We just need to do it. That means we need to invest more in defence and produce more capabilities. This cannot wait. We need to boost the resilience of our societies and critical infrastructure. And we need to sustain and step up our support for Ukraine to change the trajectory of the war and deter further Russian aggression in the future. On all of this, defence, resilience, Ukraine, NATO and the EU must work hand in hand. Since the start of Russia's all-out war against Ukraine, we have demonstrated, I believe, unprecedented political unity and unprecedented coherence. I have every intention to help keep this going. And I know there is the same level of commitment within the EU's leadership, in the Parliament, in the Commission, in the Council. Stronger defence is my top priority. And this is about spending more, spending better, but also producing more. Not to provoke war, but to prevent war. NATO allies have certainly increased defence spending. 2/3 are now spending at least 2% of GDP on defence. And that's good, and I very much welcome their efforts. But to be honest, 2% is not nearly enough. To stay safe in the years to come, allies will need to spend considerably more than 2%. As parliamentarians, you know well that security does not come for free. You have a powerful voice, and you have a critical role to play in the debate on the urgent need to increase defence spending. I know spending more on defence means spending less on other priorities if you do not want to raise taxes. I'm a centre-right politician, so I don't like raising taxes. But of course, you could still do it as long as the money is being delivered. But generally speaking, spending more on defence means spending less on other priorities. But it can make a big difference for our future security. On average, European countries easily spend up to 1/4 of their national income on pensions, health and social security systems. And we need only a small fraction of that money to make defence much stronger. So I count on you to make sure we all invest more in defence. It is an investment in our security and the security of our children and grandchildren. We also need to quickly ramp up the production of crucial assets and capabilities, including ships, tanks, jets, munitions, satellites and drones. A few months ago, I visited engineers in Paris at Thales and a Rheinmetall factory in Italy. Yes, a Rheinmetall factory in Italy. So this was a subsidiary of Rheinmetall based outside Rome. European defence industry is doing truly impressive work, and the capabilities they provide are essential. But the reality is that we are not where we need to be, not yet. Our industry is still too small, it is too fragmented, and to be honest, it is too slow. I welcome and support that the EU is now redoubling efforts to remedy this by enhancing our defence industrial base. And with the European Defence Industry Programme, we have an opportunity to bolster our shared security. Yet, while I enthusiastically applaud, I also here urge caution. I believe we must avoid creating new barriers between allies that would only increase costs, complicate production and hamper innovation. Involving non-EU allies in EU defence industrial efforts is vital, I believe, for the security of Europe. Transatlantic defence industrial cooperation makes us all stronger. At a time when Russia, China, North Korea and Iran are increasing their defence industrial cooperation to unprecedented levels, it would be an act of self-harm to put up new barriers between allies within NATO. We must also avoid duplicating existing structures. We cannot afford to waste time and resources. But we are all well placed to complement each other, and that's exactly what we should work to do. NATO is great at the hard stuff. We have the structures in place to set military standards, to set capability targets and produce them jointly. On the other hand, the EU has the awesome advantage of the internal market. That's a huge soft power element. It can help get defence production going at a much higher pace. And therefore, I believe that cooperation is truly win-win. My next point is on resilience, another area where both our organizations, EU and NATO, already work closely together. But we can and we must do more. Cyber attacks, acts of sabotage, espionage, disinformation, instrumentalized migration, our countries are increasingly the target of hostile actions. The most recent example is the damage to an undersea power cable connecting Estonia and Finland on December 25th. And a communications cable between Lithuania and Sweden was damaged last November. We must be more resilient to such hostile actions. And we must make clear that efforts to wage war through sabotage and other destabilization will not go unanswered. And that's why tomorrow, and that's why I'm traveling to Finland tonight, tomorrow, together with Finnish President Stubb and Estonian Prime Minister Michal, I am co-hosting the first ever Baltic Sea NATO Allies Summit in Helsinki. At the summit, a group of allied leaders will take further steps to prevent any further damage of undersea assets and to improve the resilience of energy and communications infrastructure. And we will also strengthen NATO's military presence in the region. And of course, we will discuss the shadow fleet and what to do about it. So we are responding and will continue to ensure no country can exploit us, control our infrastructure or disrupt our societies. This is not a job for NATO alone. We need to work together, leveraging our strength and expertise in tandem to keep our population safe. And then my last point on Ukraine. The future of European and global security hinges on the outcome of the war in Ukraine. We all want this war to end. But above all, we want a peace to last. I don't know how or when the war will end. But I do know peace will not last if Putin gets his way in Ukraine. Because then he will press ahead. He has threatened to start wars in the past and he has started them. Georgia in 2008, Ukraine in 2014 and again in 2022. So what is the next target to be? Peace will not last if war ends with a deal where Putin, Xi Jinping, Kim Jong-un and the regime in Tehran are high-fiving each other, feeling empowered. A deal in Ukraine that serves their interests paves the way to global instability. So I'm convinced that peace can only last if Ukraine comes to the table from a position of strength. For this, it needs our continued help. More weapons and faster, so it can defend itself better and negotiate a good deal for Ukraine, for Europe and for the world. NATO allies are providing more, and the EU support continues to be crucial. Last week, at the Ukraine Defence Contact Group meeting in Ramstein last Thursday, the US and European allies announced further aid to Ukraine. And these additional contributions are vital. NATO and the European Union have a lot to do together. And I can count on you, I know, as members of the European Parliament, to keep up the support for Ukraine, for their freedom and ours too. And I can count on you to continue strengthening our own defences. We can't afford to wait. We are safe now. We are not safe in 5 years. So we have to start today, spending more, ramping up production, getting resilience right and supporting Ukraine. I will now stop. I very much look forward to our discussion. I will try to answer as many questions as possible. I know you cannot come back if you do not like my answer, but I will not give you, I hope, any reason to get back to me by answering the question in the first place in the correct way. So I'll try to do my utmost. Thank you.
Thank you, dear Secretary General, for your valuable overview and also for underlining how crucially important the cooperation, the partnership between the European Union and NATO is. I now give the floor first to our chair of the delegations for relations with the NATO Parliamentary Assembly, our colleague Salvatore De Meo, for a maximum 3 minutes. Please, Salvatore.
Thank you, Chair. I will speak in Italian for my support. Grazie, signor Segretario Generale, per la sua presenza che ci conforta e conferma, eccomi qua, e conferma la volontà della sua istituzione di voler rafforzare il pilastro europeo all'interno dell'Assemblea parlamentare della Nato. A novembre scorso c'è stata l'Assemblea parlamentare e la nostra delegazione ha espresso in maniera chiara l'intenzione di voler cooperare affinché Nato e Unione Europea siano due istituzioni che lavorino in parallelo e non in contrapposizione. Il lavoro è molto difficile, complesso, ma credo che i primi passi che stiamo seguendo, anche con la sua presenza, vanno nella giusta direzione. Lei ha fatto riferimento alla necessità di dover investire di più in difesa. Io le rappresento la necessità di dover spiegare che la difesa non è limitata solo alla dimensione militare, ma che è una dimensione che va oltre l'aspetto tipicamente militare e include relazioni internazionali, economiche, sociali e soprattutto diplomatiche. In questo il Parlamento Europeo può essere di grande aiuto. 23 Paesi alleati sono stati europei e quindi le confermo la disponibilità della nostra istituzione a fare in modo che ci sia questa sensibilizzazione perché l'investimento non sia un obbligo ma sia una consapevolezza che soltanto mettendo insieme le nostre forze, non sostituendosi alle difese nazionali, noi possiamo migliorare la capacità difensiva e difesa significa benessere sociale, welfare, economia, opportunità per tutti. Io le chiedo se le differenze politiche dei vari Paesi alleati, soprattutto quelle che possono emergere all'indomani di elezioni politiche presenti e successive, siamo alla vigilia anche di un appuntamento elettorale importante di un partner come il Canada, possano mettere a rischio la nostra solidità e soprattutto se possano esserci dei rischi rispetto al supporto incondizionato che abbiamo espresso nei confronti dell'Ucraina, perché è vero, noi abbiamo bisogno di garantire una pace giusta e duratura in Ucraina per poter assicurare il prossimo futuro di pace. E a questo riguardo le chiedo se ci sono rischi su altri fronti, parlo del Mediterraneo, parlo dei Balcani, che sono ovviamente focolai importanti a cui non possiamo non porre la massima attenzione. Concludo il mio intervento chiedendole di dover fare uno sforzo perché l'opinione pubblica non venga divisa. Non bisogna cadere nell'errore di semplificare la discussione in difesa uguale armamenti. E in questo apprezzo l'iniziativa della Nato di voler promuovere anche un Consiglio dei giovani, perché è importante la loro posizione e sono convinto che ci possano aiutare a far capire che insieme si può, insieme possiamo fare la differenza. Grazie e buon lavoro.
Thank you, Salvatore. As this is a joint item with SEDE, I will now hand over to Marie-Agnes Strack-Zimmermann to chair the first round of question and answers. This first round is for AFET and SEDE coordinators by group, and this all for 2 minutes each. So it will be quite a challenge to handle this, but we're in safe hands with Marie-Agnes.
Okay, let's start with the coordinator of the AFET EPP, Michael Gahler.
Yes,
2 minutes.
Thank you very much, and a very warm welcome on behalf of the EPP group. Rest assured that not only my group, but the large majority of this committee and the Parliament are on your track, are on our common track when it comes to strengthening defence and also when it comes specifically to Ukraine. I'm also the standing rapporteur on Ukraine, so thanks for the remarks that you made in this regard. My question goes in the direction, as it is clear, there is a perspective of membership, but not during the hot phase of the war, certainly, but before full membership and after the end of the hot phase, there needs to be security guarantees for the country. How do you see this aspect to be addressed? What can we already now do to get Ukraine closer to NATO? And what are your thoughts about that? And where would you need to push some member states to be more positive about that? That is the one aspect. You rightly spoke about the closer EU-NATO cooperation. And you spoke of standards that you have in NATO. Now, my question is whether you would be inclined to embark on a new thought, meaning that as we also have a single market on defence, allegedly, I say, in EU since 2011, we know how little it has been practiced, but in the civilian part of the single market, we have thousands of standards that are agreed through regulations that are binding. Now, I learned that in NATO, you agree on standards, but we see in many areas that member states simply don't follow. So would you think starting discussions on behalf of NATO with EU to have existing, I speak of existing agreed NATO standards to be transformed in parallel into binding EU regulations? I think that would really get NATO where it should be, that everybody applies the standards, because we have treaty violation procedures. NATO has not. So is that an idea for you to grasp? Thank you.
Thank you. For Sede EPP, Nicolas Pascual de la Parte. 2 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, and Happy New Year to everybody. We welcome Secretary General here in front of you. Thank you very much. I will raise 3 quick points for you to answer, please. The first one is how to increase the cooperation between NATO and the European Union, which is one of the main aspects of your speech. I think that here we have capacities and possibilities that you don't have in NATO, and the other way around. For instance, here in the European Union, we can raise funds because we have a budget, a collective budget, something that you don't have in NATO. You have only a very small administrative fund, but you don't have a budget. And secondly, we can legislate even with legally binding directives and regulations. These capacities, I think, that could somehow be inserted as well in your decision-making process in NATO as one of the main strands of collaborations. I'm aware that there's quite a number of strands of work that we are collaborating already, more than 60, 65, 66, but I think that this legislative capacity and the budgetary capacity of the European Union should be somehow inserted as well in your decision-making process in NATO. First question. The second one is capacity planning. I think that now that we have a new commissioner for the first time for defence in the European Union, he will be asked to develop plans. He's going to present the white paper for defence within the next 100 days together with the High Representative. And one of the main items will be the capacity planning for our military industry. How do you intend to avoid duplications concerning this very important thing? The capacity planning in NATO is very well oiled, is working properly well, and you have a great experience now. And the third one is how to shorten the time of developing new weapon systems. I mean, so far the average time is 15 years, 15 years, since a project system is designed until it is totally operational. I think that we cannot continue with this. How do you intend to shorten up this time to develop new weapon systems? Thank you very much.
Okay, for S&D, the AFET, I have been told that nobody will be there. So if there are anybody, okay. Tony.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Secretary General, I would like to welcome you to our House on behalf of S&D in your new role in this very timely moment, 1 week before President Trump takes over. In line with the NATO strategic concept, I echo that NATO enlargement has been a historic success. It has strengthened our alliance and contributed to peace and stability. You have said recently, and you repeated this afternoon, that we face a growing number of challenges globally, from a more aggressive Russia to terrorism, to strategic competition with China, as well as increasing alignment of China, Russia, North Korea and Iran. But beyond this, let me extend my interest to our immediate neighbourhood. Secretary General, last year you have visited Srebrenica in Bosnia and Herzegovina. As experienced leader and former Prime Minister, you are certainly very well acquainted with security challenges in the Western Balkans. which was once called the power keg of the Europe. Therefore, I would use the opportunity to ask you two questions. How do you see the role of hybrid warfare, not only in the EU, but also in the Western Balkans, where we have seen increased activity by Russia, particularly with disinformation, as in the case of recently opened Russia Today TV in Serbia? And how would you assess the security situation in the Western Balkans in general, and what would be some initiatives of activities you are planning to conduct as a NATO Secretary General? Thank you in advance.
Thank you very much. And as in the Sede, Yanis?
Here, Mr. Secretary General. Thank you very much for your presence in our committee, and I wish you every success in your mandate. You take over at a period when we have the war in Ukraine, war in Gaza, regime change in Syria, and the increase in hybrid attacks on the infrastructure of members of the Union and NATO, and even attempts to interfere in the democratic functions of the countries. At this critical time for Europe, we are exactly 1 week before President Trump returns to the White House. Last week's interview about his plans for acquisitions and annexations against 2 NATO members, Denmark and Canada, was shocking to say the least. In this very difficult context, I would like to ask you how you intend to ensure the unity of the alliance and the protection of the border integrity of all member states. I would also like to ask you to tell us about the cooperation between the European Union and NATO in addressing the hybrid threats that many member states are facing, and more generally, how do you see defence cooperation between the European Union and NATO? Would you be supportive of a more autonomous European defence? Finally, I would like to ask you about defence spending. What would be for you an adequate target instead of 2% of GDP? Wouldn't it be more effective to focus on making better use of defence spending than to ask for its continued increase? Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. For AFET Patriots, Jordan Bardella.
Merci Madame la Présidente. Monsieur le Secrétaire Général, merci de votre présence devant cette commission. Moi, je souhaiterais vous entendre sur le rôle d'un État clé de l'OTAN qu'est la Turquie. Entre intimidation frontalière à l'égard de la Grèce, sa politique de réarmement drastique et son rapprochement avec Moscou, la Turquie redéfinit son rôle sur la scène internationale en face d'une Europe bien naïve quant à la marche du monde. D'un côté, la Turquie cherche à endormir l'Occident à travers sa participation à l'OTAN et la ratification d'accords de coopération en matière migratoire. De l'autre, ses ambitions expansionnistes et sa politique agressive en Méditerranée la placent parmi ces puissances qui ne nous veulent pas nécessairement du bien. Pour le président Erdogan, l'OTAN est un outil d'influence de ses propres ambitions, lui qui rêve de faire de son pays une porte de l'Est et un pont en mesure de regarder à la fois vers Moscou et à la fois vers l'OTAN. Le récent refus d'Ankara de participer à l'exercice aérien de l'Alliance en Grèce en septembre dernier doit, je le crois, attirer notre attention. Ce geste n'est pas isolé et s'inscrit dans la volonté d'asseoir une ambition régionale, en oubliant parfois ses obligations vis-à-vis de l'Alliance dont la Turquie est censée partager les valeurs. Monsieur le Secrétaire général, la liste des provocations turques est longue comme le bras. Je me permets de rappeler que la Turquie a joué un rôle actif dans la crise migratoire, aux frontières de l'Europe en y acheminant délibérément des réfugiés syriens, qu'elle entretient les plus grandes ambiguïtés à l'égard du fondamentalisme islamiste. Elle s'est vivement opposée à la France sur le plan diplomatique en 2020, a usé d'un chantage inacceptable à notre égard concernant l'adhésion de la Suède à l'OTAN. Elle reste le seul État de l'Alliance à ne pas s'associer aux sanctions contre la Russie. Elle continue de violer la souveraineté territoriale de Chypre et de la Grèce en mer Égée, y empêchant le forage d'entreprises européennes. Et en tant que deuxième armée de l'OTAN, la Turquie se sait incontournable. La question que je souhaiterais donc vous poser est simple. Comment appréhendez-vous ce double jeu de la Turquie au sein de l'Alliance Atlantique? Je vous remercie.
Merci. Für Sede, Pierre Romain.
Merci Madame la Présidente. Juste ici.
Okay.
Et je vais continuer en français. Monsieur le secrétaire général, le stratégiste français Hervé Couteau-Bégary écrivait « L'OTAN est cette alliance dans laquelle tous les membres sont égaux, mais l'un est plus égal que les autres. Il se trouve aujourd'hui qu'à la tête de ce pays plus égal que les autres, il y a désormais un homme qui a l'intention d'afficher au grand jour les ambitions de l'Amérique, de maximiser ses intérêts, y compris, parfois, aux dépens de ses alliés. Il y a quelques jours, dans une interview avec l'agence de presse allemande dpa, vous avez déclaré, Monsieur le secrétaire général, qu'il serait souhaitable que les États-Unis libéralisent leur marché de la défense afin que les Européens puissent s'approvisionner plus facilement. Autrement dit, les Européens doivent céder au chantage américain et alourdir encore leur dépendance industrielle et technologique. Ce serait, selon vous et selon d'autres, un moyen d'obtenir la paix au sein de l'Alliance atlantique. Pourtant, la guerre d'Ukraine sur le sol européen a montré l'importance d'adapter en Europe une logique industrielle de masse, de stock. Cette guerre d'attrition montre aussi que la dépendance à la production et aux livraisons d'une puissance extérieure est un risque, car on dépend alors de décisions politiques extérieures sur lesquelles nous n'avons pas de prise. À l'inverse de ce discours de concession, il est dans l'intérêt des États européens de tenir un discours d'affirmation. C'est d'ailleurs ce que souhaitent les équipes de Trump. Écoutons ce que dit le vice-président J.D. Vance lorsqu'il exhorte les États européens à ne plus être des États clients, mais devenir des alliés forts qui se respectent et se font respecter sur le continent. J'aimerais donc vous demander, Monsieur le secrétaire général, comment vous concevez l'idée d'un pilier européen au sein de l'OTAN? Est-ce l'idée d'un superconsommateur européen faisant ses provisions de l'autre côté de l'Atlantique pour maintenir sa sympathie? Ou est-ce l'idée d'un rééquilibrage qui passe par une remontée en puissance industrielle en Europe, davantage de dépenses en Europe, et peut-être plus tard par un partage plus équitable des responsabilités? Je vous remercie.
Thank you very much. For AFET ECR, Adam Ilan.
Here. Thank you. Thank you, Chair. It is a privilege to welcome you, Mr. Secretary General, to our committee today. Your leadership at NATO comes at a pivotal time when Europe and the transatlantic community face challenges of unprecedented complexity and urgency. The Russian aggression against Ukraine has shattered the post-Cold War security order and reminded us that peace in Europe cannot be taken for granted. NATO's role in providing collective security, deterring aggression and projecting stability has never been more critical. Tomorrow's summit of Baltic Sea NATO countries highlights the growing importance of the Baltic region in the strategic planning. Russia remains the most immediate and significant threat to NATO's eastern flank. The militarization of Kaliningrad, the use of hybrid tactics in Belarus and the shadow fleet operating in the Baltic Sea pose direct challenges to Poland and the Baltic states. These actions are part of Russia's broader strategy to destabilize the region and weaken NATO's cohesion. So my question to you would be, what concrete actions is NATO planning to counter these specific Russian threats, particularly in terms of enhanced forward presence, rapid deployment capabilities, and coordinated hybrid response strategies? How is NATO preparing for potential escalation scenarios, including unconventional tactics such as cyber attacks or energy weaponization in this region? And last, we note with great interest NATO's recent assumption of air defense operation in Poland from the United States. This transaction underscores Europe's growing role in securing its own defense and supporting Ukraine. Poland's logistic hubs are critical in ensuring the flow of military equipment and humanitarian aid to Ukraine, making their defense a top priority. What are NATO's plans to further foster air defense capabilities in Poland and broader eastern flank, particularly now as threats are evolving? Thank you.
Thank you very much. For CDICA, Reinis.
Labdien, ģenerālsekretār kungs, paldies par jūsu brīnišķīgo stāstījumu. Grūti tam ir nepiekrist, ja vien neņem vērā, ka drīz būs 3 pilni gadi kopš pilna mēroga iebrukuma Ukrainā, 11 gadi kopš karš tur vispār notiek un arī 11 gadi kopš, teiksim, atklātiem, jums nepatīk vārds hibrīda iebrukumiem, jūs to saucat par sabotāžu vai, manuprāt, valsts atbalstītu terorismu. dažādās pasaules malās, un šis laiks ir diezgan ātri iet uz priekšu. Man ir tāds jautājums, vai varbūt jums ir kāds redzējums, kas mums traucē attīstīties un iet uz priekšu ātrāk, kļūt stiprākiem, un arī kādi konkrēti varbūt jūs redzat risinājums, kā tieši cīnīties ar šo sabotāžu vai valstu atbalstīto terorismu, jo skaidrs, ka kopš 49. gada ir mainījusies izpratnē par to, kas ir apdraudējumi, un mēs visi saprotam, ka tie vairs nav tikai tieši bruņoti iebrukumi, bet arī dažādi citu veida uzbrukumi. Un vai jums ir kāds varbūt jau konkrēts redzējums, ko NATO varētu darīt vai ko mainīt, lai pret to cīnītos? Paldies!
Vielen Dank voor AFET Renew, Hilde.
Wel, dankjewel. En beste Mark, allereerst, hier zit ik, allereerst heel erg bedankt voor uw energie en het enthousiasme dat je brengt in de NAVO-hoofdkwartier en gefeliciteerd. We verwachten ook vanuit België heel erg veel van u als nieuwe secretaris-generaal. En ik vind dat we met Europa eigenlijk vandaag samen op het Kennedy-punt gekomen zijn, op het punt van defensie. Ask not what NATO can do for us, but ask what Europe can do for NATO. En ik moet u zeggen, de kritiek van Trump is vaak niet de meest verfijnde. Zeker niet op het vlak van de NAVO is ze helaas terecht, moeten we toch wel zeggen. En om dit probleem aan te pakken hebben wij toch wel een heel duidelijke eigen Europese militaire dynamiek nodig. Mark, ik ben een van degenen die hier in het huis al jaren pleit voor een Europese defensie en zelfs wat mij betreft een Europees leger. Maar ik moet u zeggen, als ik dat hier breng, dan hoor je toch heel fel vanuit de NAVO-kringen ook, pas op, niet te Europees, zet geen concurrentie op met die NAVO-structuren. Terwijl, ik begrijp die waarschuwing wel, maar anderzijds, als de NAVO wil overleven, zullen we sterke Europese structuren nodig hebben. En ik richt mij nu tot u als liberaal. U weet heel goed, als we willen dat de Europeanen akkoord gaan, dat we meer gaan investeren in defensie, naar die 2, 3, 4%, dan gaat er ook iets moeten terugvloeien. Dan verwachten ze Europese tewerkstelling. Ze verwachten Europese defensieindustrie. En u bent een bruggenbouwer. De reden dat u daar zit, is dat u een bruggenbouwer bent. En ik stel u eigenlijk maar één heel concrete vraag. Kan u alsjeblieft de Amerikanen masseren dat ze niet zo'n angst hebben van die ontwikkeling van die Europese defensie, van die defensieindustrie, van die Europese aankopen, zodanig dat we met een sterk Europa de NAVO kunnen versterken met de VS en met Turkije. Dat is de rol die ik van u verwacht. Dank u wel.
Thank you very much. And now for CD Renew, Malik. Come on.
Ja. Goed voorbeeld, dat volgen. Dus dat betekent dat ik het ook gewoon in het Nederlands ga doen als de coördinator voor een nieuwe het ook in het Nederlands doet. Allereerst een bijzonder welkom natuurlijk secretario of de NAVO, de Rutte, hier vandaag in het Europees Parlement. Fantastisch om u in deze rol hier ook te zien. In tijden waar het natuurlijk niet de wereld aan het veranderen is. En de uitdagingen eigenlijk alleen maar groter zijn. Maar ja, ik geloof dat deze rol u het beste past. Dus dat komt heel goed. Daar heb ik alle vertrouwen in. Allereerst wil ik ook zeggen dat ik het sowieso ook bijzonder vind dat u hier vandaag bent. Als eerste dag van deze politieke aantreden in het nieuwe jaar. En dat u ook heeft aangegeven dat u meer in contact ook wil met het Europese Parlement. Omdat we het uiteindelijk samen elkaar ook daarin moeten en kunnen versterken. Op dat ene punt, misschien als het gaat om die bestedingen, de 2% norm, daar wisselen nog steeds verschillende lidstaten in. We hoeven aan Baltische lidstaten niet uit te leggen hoeveel geld je moet investeren in defensie als het gaat om begrotingen. En sommige West-Europese landen blijven nog best wel achter. Wat zou nou een voorstel kunnen zijn voor het Europese Parlement om daar veel steviger en sterker te kunnen zijn, ook naar die lidstaten, om meer te gaan investeren in defensie? U had zelf in uw inleiding had u het er ook over dat de EU ook een mogelijkheid heeft om onder artikel 5 tegen nieuwe dreigingen op te treden, samen met de NAVO. Er moet er dan ook niet eigenlijk een soort nieuwe norm komen om tot een minimum-inspanning te doen om die nieuwe dreigingen zoals sabotage en destabilisatie tegen te gaan. Want die 2%-norm is natuurlijk het materiële norm, de materiële investeringen die aan gaande is. Maar als je ook kijkt naar die andere dreigingen, zou er ook niet veel meer samengewerkt moeten worden en toegewerkt moeten worden naar minimumnormen om ook daar voldoende financiële middelen te hebben om uiteindelijk die dreigingen met elkaar ook tegen te gaan. Dank u wel.
Perfect. Now for AFID Greens, Hannah.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Mr. Secretary General, it's good you're here. And I think we need a closer and more collegial cooperation between EU and NATO more than ever. I'd say even more so after January 20. But this leads us to a number of questions. First one on the EU Defence Union. We are just about to start our discussion on the EU White Book for Defence. Defining the abstract concept of the EU Defence Union, I wonder how you think the EU Defence Union could best align and fit into NATO structures, and if you could suggest a separation of tasks. What is for EU and what is for NATO? How would that look like? Second question, and you said it yourself, spending more on defence. It is clear that member states need to step up defence spending. I'm not sure if the discussion on percentage is of good value, especially when GDPs might shrink. So it would be interesting for us to get an overall figure of what you think EU member states should be spending in just number of billions of euros in your regard. And as the former leader of the Frugals in the European Union and now SecGen of NATO, I'm wondering what you think about Eurobonds as a possible way forward. On the upcoming Baltic summit, we are seeing a growing number of Russian Jews name them destabilizing attacks in the Baltic Sea. Is the current setup of NATO Task Force Baltic good enough, or could you give us a sneak preview of what you're discussing tomorrow? And my last question, how do you intend to deal with intra-NATO security threats, such as Trump threatening to annex Canada?
Thank you very much. And now for CD Greens, Martins.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Secretary General, for being here in Parliament. So during Donald Trump's presidency, he raised the possibility of the United States leaving NATO and even threatened Denmark over Greenland. So now, with a future US President-elect potentially taking a similar stance, many Europeans are questioning whether we can continue to rely on the US for our security. So do you believe Europe should take stronger steps to defend itself in case the US reduce its commitment to NATO in the future? And what specific actions should European countries take now to prepare for such scenario? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And for AFED, the left, Mark Botenga.
Merci, Monsieur Rutte. Vous êtes secrétaire général de l'OTAN. Évidemment, je viens de quitter la rue où des dizaines de milliers de travailleurs et de syndicats belges ont manifesté contre les plans, notamment en Belgique, mais qu'on voit partout en Europe, de couper dans les pensions, de couper dans les services publics. Et alors, j'arrive ici face au secrétaire général de l'OTAN qui me dit, effectivement, nous devons investir davantage dans la défense, c'est une question de priorité et ça fait qu'il y aura moins d'argent pour les pensions et pour l'enseignement, pour les hôpitaux. Alors je dois évidemment relayer alors la question que se posent les gens, c'est-à-dire aujourd'hui, d'abord l'OTAN dit qu'il faut dépenser 2% du produit intérieur brut pour la défense, maintenant vous parlez des 4%, Donald Trump, président élu des États-Unis, parle déjà de 5%. Tout ça, pour la Belgique, ça voudrait dire, par exemple, qu'on passerait de 7 milliards annuels actuellement vers 30 milliards environ. Vous imaginez bien qu'entre-temps, on fait des coupes dans le social, mais on investit massivement dans le militaire. Les gens se disent, oula, ça c'est quand même inacceptable, mais peut-être c'est nécessaire. Ma question, c'est, j'ai regardé, l'OTAN dépense aujourd'hui environ, annuellement, les dépenses en défense des pays membres, c'est 1185 milliards. La Russie, principale menace considérée sur le flanc Est, c'est plus ou moins 10 fois moins. Je pense qu'on est à 126 milliards. À ce niveau-là, pourquoi est-ce qu'avec tout l'argent que nous dépensons en défense, on n'est pas capable de se défendre aujourd'hui? C'est ça la question que me posent les gens. Est-ce que c'est des politiciens complètement incompétents qui ne savent pas gérer ces budgets? Est-ce qu'en réalité, c'est parce que cet argent est mal dépensé? Est-ce que ça va dans les caisses des actionnaires des grandes multinationales? C'est quoi? Pourquoi est-ce qu'avec ce budget qui est tellement plus important que le reste du monde, on n'arriverait pas à se défendre aujourd'hui? Merci.
Vielen Dank. For the AFET, ESN, Stanislav Stoyanov. Isn't here? Okay, then for the SEDE. Oh, sorry, where are you? Oh.
Non, excusez-moi, on avait le left CD aussi.
Yes, we Potenga said he is here for both. But anyway, ask your okay. Anyway, ask your questions and come.
Okay.
Okay. Afterwards. First of all, Stanislav for.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure. I think we informed the Secretariat that there's one speaker for AFET left and one speaker for SEDE left, like for all the other groups. I'm not too sure why that would be different now. Thank you.
Okay. First of all, I just called for Stanislav. Where is Stanislav?
Stanislav is not here.
He's not here. Okay, that makes it easier. So take your 2 minutes and go ahead. And then afterwards, Hans Neuhoff. Is Hans Neuhoff here? Okay, then the floor is yours. You can start. Come on, 2 minutes.
Thank you. I'll speak in Bulgarian. В края на 90-те години на миналия век големият американски дипломат Джордж Кенън определи предстоящото разширяване на НАТО като груба грешка с епични размери. Джордж Кенън е създателя на политиката на сдържането на Съветския съюз и познаваше руснаците по-добре от всеки друг. Той прекрасно разбираше колко е вредно да бъде дразнена Русия. За жалост, никой представител на колективния Запад не го чу. НАТО трябваше да се разпусне, както беше разпуснат Варшавския договор. А вместо това пактът продължи с безумното си разширяване. И без изобщо да пита народите на въпросните държави, дали искат страните им да се присъединят към него. Нас в България никой от управляващите не ни попита дали искаме да членуваме в НАТО или не. Сигурен съм, че ако сега се проведе референдум по въпроса, повечето българи ще са против членството на България в този пакт. Защото да си член на НАТО днес е гаранция не за сигурност, а за въвличането в поредната касапница. Именно стремежът на пакта да погълне Украйна и да създаде свои бази на нейна територия е основната причина за войната днес в тази страна. Така че колкото по-дълго съществува НАТО, толкова по-дълго ще съществува опасността от Трета световна война. Благодаря.
Marina, yeah. Thank you very much. First of all, Mark Potenga, first of all, he said for both, but no problem. So now, Marie Mesur. For the left.
Merci beaucoup.
Okay.
Merci Madame la Présidente, Monsieur le Secrétaire Général. Alors il paraît que vous êtes l'homme qui murmure à l'oreille de Donald Trump. Je ne sais pas si vous murmurez effectivement à son oreille, mais néanmoins, en tant que secrétaire général de l'OTAN, vous avez probablement un avis sur certaines de ses déclarations en tant que président des États-Unis d'Amérique. Vous êtes bien entendu familier avec l'article 5 du traité de l'Atlantique Nord qui stipule qu'une attaque armée contre un État membre de ce traité sera considérée comme une attaque armée dirigée contre l'ensemble des États membres de ce traité, chacun prenant alors des mesures nécessaires pour venir en aide aux pays attaqués. Monsieur le secrétaire général, le Canada et les États-Unis sont des États membres de l'OTAN. Or, ces deux pays sont menacés par la velléité expansionniste de Donald Trump. Ce dirigeant d'extrême droite et ses alliés multiplient les politiques de déstabilisation et d'ingérence à l'encontre d'autres États membres de l'OTAN, je pense notamment à l'Allemagne et au Royaume-Uni. Dans ce contexte, quel est votre regard sur les déclarations du président Trump envisageant un recours à la force armée pour annexer le Groenland, sur la guerre économique qu'il veut déclencher contre le Canada afin de le rattacher aux États-Unis, rien que ça, sur l'ingérence d'Elon Musk, membre de l'administration américaine, dans la vie démocratique de l'Allemagne et du Royaume-Uni. Et finalement, au titre de l'article 5, Ma question, c'est de savoir, mais que devraient faire les États membres de l'OTAN si les États-Unis envisagent finalement, militairement, d'envahir le Groenland? Je vous remercie.
So, colleagues, we have just 10 minutes left. After 10 minutes, I mean, it makes sense that Mr. Rutte will answer it. So I start. I have lots of questions, but it's, sorry, not possible. So we start with Mr. Stier, EPP.
Thank you, Madam Chair. 1 minute. Very well. Mr. Secretary General, a year ago you were in Sarajevo, and that was a visit that was very, here I am. Yeah, it was very instrumental for the European Council at that time to decide to open up negotiations for Bosnia and Herzegovina with the EU. Now, as the Secretary General, how do you see the path of that country towards NATO, because it also has its membership action plan? And second, we discussed a lot about the cooperation between NATO and the EU. We have it on the ground in Bosnia and Herzegovina with Altea. Is that a framework that you would like to expand in the overall cooperation between EU and NATO? Thank you.
Perfect. 30 seconds are better. Then Mrs. Inkia.
Thank you very much, Madam President, and I'm here. Welcome to the European Parliament, Mr. Secretary General. I think none of us has missed the President-elect Donald Trump's last troubling remarks, I would say, suggesting that Greenland should become a part of the US. He even stated that he will not exclude any military interventions. Saying that towards another NATO ally is unacceptable. In these times of threats to international law, NATO country must stand united, as you yourself said. Such statements are therefore unacceptable and play also into the hands of Russia and China. As Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen stated, discussions about Greenland's future must start and end in Nuuk. As Social Democrats, we urge you, as the Secretary General of NATO, to stand firm in support of Denmark and Greenland. In these times of rising geopolitical tension especially, it is vital that we stand united in defense of international law. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Cherba. 1 minute.
Good afternoon, Mr. Secretary General. I'm a former president of NATO Parliamentary Assembly, and thank you for your support for the parliamentary dimension of the Assembly. 2 weeks ago, Poland has opened the Polish presidency of the Council of the European Union, and Prime Minister Tusk and President Costa already announced that there will be an informal meeting of the European leaders at the beginning of February and dedicated to the topic of defense. And you will be present as a Secretary General, but also the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. What are your expectations from this meeting? And the second thing, I'm also a current standing rapporteur on the US. And in the light of the outcome of the American elections, I would like to thank you for this dialogue you have from the day one with the new president-elect and his administration. We must maintain our strategic partnership with the US, NATO, but the first test of this should be Ukraine. Do you agree with this? And what are your expectations with this dialogue? Thank you.
Thank you. Now Roberto Vanaggi.
Yes, I'm going to speak in Italian. Il 5 marzo del 2023 un intelligence update britannico ci raccontava come i russi combattessero con i badili per carenza di munizioni. La Presidente della Commissione von der Leyen ci ha spesse volte detto come i russi rubassero le schede elettroniche dalle lavatrici ucraine per mandarle in Russia al fine di utilizzarle per i loro sistemi d'arma. E la Nato ci dice ogni giorno delle ingenti perdite russe che incrementano ogni giorno di 1500 ogni giorno. Ora, in questa situazione di evidente crisi della Russia contro un paese modesto come l'Ucraina e soprattutto tenuto conto che l'Europa spende 314 miliardi di euro in un regime di mercato, mentre la Russia ne spende 140 per la difesa in un regime di guerra, ci spiega perché tra 3 o 4 anni la Russia potrebbe attaccare un paese della Nato e perché dovremmo spendere di più in difesa?
Thank you very much. And now Mr.
Ευχαριστώ εδώ. Θα μιλήσω ελληνικά.
I will speak in Greek. Τα πρόσφατα γεγονότα στη Συρία, σε συνδυασμό με τις υπόλοιπες εξελίξεις στη Μέση Ανατολή, σύμφωνα με εμπειρογνώμονες, καθιστούν πιθανό πόλεμο μεταξύ Τουρκίας και Ισραήλ. Θυμίζω ότι ο Ερντογάν απείλησε ευθέως το Ισραήλ, ενώ σε πρόσφατη συγκέντρωσή του υποστηριχτές του ζητούσαν να φτάσει στην Ιερουσαλήμ. Την ίδια στιγμή η Τουρκία διαχρονικά απειλεί με πόλεμο κάσους μπέλι, εταίρος στο ΝΑΤΟ στην Ελλάδα, ενώ εμπόδιζε την ένταξη Σουηδίας και Φινλανδίας στη συμμαχία. Υπενθυμίζω δε ότι η Τουρκία κατέχει παράνομα το 37% της επικράτειας της Κυπριακής Δημοκρατίας, δηλαδή εδάφη της Ευρωπαϊκής Ένωσης, της οποίας οι πλήστες χώρες είναι μέλη του ΝΑΤΟ. Ως Ευρωβουλευτές θέλουμε να είμαστε επικοδομητικοί, κατανοώντας το πρόβλημα που προκαλεί ένα κράτος ταραξίας στους νατοικούς κόλπους. Γι' αυτό βρισκόμαστε σε προχωρημένες συζητήσεις με άλλους ευρωβουλευτές για επανασύσταση Επιτροπής Εποπτείας της Τουρκίας με σκοπό να συμβάλλουμε στο ομολογουμένως δύσκολο έργο σας. Κλείνοντας, επιβάλλεται να εξετάσουμε την πιθανότητα ένταξης της Κυπριακής Δημοκρατίας στο ΝΑΤΟ και να επανεξετάσουμε τον μελλοντικό ρόλο της Τουρκίας.
Thank you very much. And now, Mr. Rutte.
Ja, thank you, Madam Chair. I will speak in German. Herr Generalsekretär, ich komme auf ein Gespräch mit Lloyd Austin vom 9.1. Sie sprachen dabei vom Geist der Lastenverteilung. Nun sieht die Realität in der Ukraine praktisch anders aus. Was den Kriegsverlauf betrifft, sind auch einige Kollegen hier noch nicht ganz auf dem neuesten Stand. Was die Realität in dem Ukraine-Krieg betrifft, der Ukraine-Krieg ist objektiv verloren. Präsident Trump wird den Krieg bis Ostern beenden. All Ihre Bemühungen erweisen sich als Schuss in den Ofen. Der erste Teil meiner Frage, wie gehen Sie mit diesen neuen Realitäten um, auch wenn Sie schon vorhin einiges dazu gesagt haben. Der zweite Teil betrifft mein Heimatland Deutschland. Deutschland hat bis zum Verlust der eigenen Verteidigungsfähigkeit mit Unterstützung geleistet. Wie bekommt mein Heimatland Deutschland seine Unterstützungsleistungen ersetzt und von wen? Und zum Schluss möchte ich anmerken, dass mir Ihre Worte zu der kritischen Infrastruktur, zum Schutz dessen sehr gut gefallen haben. Es wäre natürlich gut, wir hätten das vor der Zerstörung von Nord Stream 2 schon gehört. Dankeschön.
So, Mr. Reuten.
Ja, thank you, Chair. Welkom, secretaris-generaal. Er is niets veranderd aan onze taak sinds februari 22 en ook niet sinds 5 november. We hebben alleen een kans met Oekraïne een sterke onderhandelingspositie. En uw voorganger was zeer fel op het recenseren van Oekraïnes prestaties of het voeden van Kremlin narratives. Dus alle steun voor uw heldere oproep om juist nu Oekraïne extra te steunen met alle militaire middelen die het nodig heeft. Maar te veel EU- en NAVO-lidstaten houden nog de hand te veel op de rem met spullen in de opslag die nu nodig zijn in Oekraïne. Wat gaat u daaraan doen? Als we een eerlijke, rechtvaardige en duurzame vrede krijgen, dan moet die bewaakt worden. En om de simpele reden dat Oekraïne zelf beslist waar het lid van wil worden, vind ik dat NATO-lidmaatschap op tafel moet blijven. Wat kan NAVO nu al doen om aan die garanties te werken? En tenslotte, ik zie niet in waarom we zouden blijven toestaan dat de Russische schaduwvloot ongehinderd en ongecontroleerd gebruik maakt van onze wateren. Neem dat alstublieft mee in uw gesprekken in Finland de komende dagen.
Now, Mrs. Kalniete.
Thank you. I'm here. Thank you, Mr. Secretary General. You have just passed 100 years mark since becoming NATO Secretary General. Congratulations. I was very happy to learn that tomorrow there is a Nordic-Baltic NATO summit. And my question is, what do you have in your portfolio as a proposal how to secure, to do more to secure the Baltics and the eastern flank from future Russian aggression? What concrete steps will be taken during your tenure as Secretary General to achieve this goal? Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Sovendal.
Thank you very much. I'm here. Yeah, I come from Denmark, but nevertheless I'll not speak about Greenland. I think a lot of questions have been put. I'll ask about the Shadow Fleet. When you come to Finland tomorrow, I think another way of weakening the aggressor is to ensure that they cannot keep sailing Shadow Fleet ships through in the Baltic Sea. the countries around the Baltic Sea are doing what they can. Germany, Finland, Denmark have all had the problems. But how do we make it coordinated? Will you follow that up tomorrow, Mr. General Secretary, and find some proposal where we are sure we act together, both to weaken the incomes of the Russians to make the war, but also to prevent the catastrophe it would be if one of these oil ships are putting their oil out in the narrow straits of Denmark and Sweden, etc. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Terras.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary General. I wish you all the best and all your mastering the Dutch politics. You should be very good in keeping NATO together in the coming very difficult years. But my concern goes to your meeting tomorrow. I understand that that is something which the Baltic states and Nordic states are concerned of, but throughout the NATO's history, there's always been attempts of regionalization of the security, and that is one example of regionalization. I think the Spanish and the Portuguese must be as much interested in the security in the Baltics as the Baltic states countries, so that would be my concern. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Last but not least, but time is running out, Mr. Kramer.
Thank you very much for the last but not least, and congratulations, first of all, General Secretary, and good luck in this difficult task ahead. I'm just back from a couple of weeks of campaigning on the German campaign trail, and I'll tell you very clearly, people do understand the threat and also the necessity to invest in our defence. What a lot of people do not understand, however, is why we still afford this level of inefficiency when it comes to procurement and when it comes to coordination between our procurement agencies. According to the Minister report, we could save 30% of what we are spending if we did that in a more coordinated manner, more effectively. So my question is, how do we get more bang for the buck? And more concretely, how are you going to ensure better coordination, especially between the NSPA, the NATO procurement agency, and, for instance, the European Union? How can we make sure that we don't have double structures there, but that people get their money's worth in terms of defence? Thank you.
Right, thank you. Mr. Secretary General, it's up to you now to answer as many questions as possible and to summarize, and please bear in mind that we have to close in about 14-15 minutes. Yeah. The floor is yours. But before I give you the floor, may I just welcome among us the longest-serving member of the European Parliament in our history and the long-serving chair of our Foreign Affairs Committee, Elmar Brok. A warm welcome to you.
Good to see you.
And now, after Elmar, it's Mark.
Good to see you. And thanks for all the questions. Let me try to deal with as many as possible. So, first of all, on the issue of of course, elections will be taking place always. So we will have elections all over Europe and in Canada, elsewhere. We have to deal with them. This is democracy. I'm happy that we have these elections. I think you are too. And on the second question, which was on the Mediterranean and the Western Balkans and youth, specifically in youth, we just launched a process for a youth advisory council, and we will again host a youth summit. I totally agree that we should also focus on the Mediterranean, the southern neighbourhood. There is a special Secretary General, special representative for the southern neighbourhood. We work very closely with Jordan, but also, of course, in Iraq we have a big mission, but also with countries like Tunisia, Mauritania, other countries in the southern neighbourhood, and we have a close cooperation with basically most of the countries over there. And then on the Balkans, and many of you raised that, so maybe I can answer that because of the first question also going into the Balkans. Yes, of course, we have some worries there, particularly, of course, the situation between Bosnia, in Bosnia, but also between Serbia and Kosovo. When I get to Bosnia first, and there were some other questions on Bosnia also here, we are closely monitoring, of course, security developments in Bosnia and Herzegovina. I think NATO allies are always very clear. We will not allow a security vacuum vacuum to emerge in Bosnia and Herzegovina and more generally in the Western Balkans. It is crucial that the EUFOR mandate is renewed in November. EUFOR plays a key role in maintaining a safe and secure environment with support from NATO under the Berlin Plus arrangements. And, of course, NATO and the EU cooperate closely on the ground, as you know, in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And we support a robust EUFOR Althea, and we will keep in close contact at all levels to ensure that we manage all potential challenges effectively together. That's on Bosnia. And we also are very much in contact, of course, with Kosovo, but also with Serbia to make sure that also the elections coming up in Kosovo later, I think it is later this month or early February, that they will not lead to destabilization. That's also crucial. But again, in Western Balkans, we really have to make sure that we take a close look into this and stay closely connected. It is a crucial neighborhood. Then on the security guarantees, yes, well, I would say let's play it step by step. First of all, we have to make sure that Ukraine is in a position of strength as soon as it enters into peace talks. That's what we can do now, to make sure that they get into a position of strength. As far as we are concerned, in the future, Ukraine should become a member of NATO. That is what we promised Ukraine. We are building that bridge now by all the bilateral security agreements between many allies and Ukraine, but also through the $40 billion pledge. The NSETU organization, which is the Commanding Wiesbaden, has started a couple of weeks ago taking over tasks of the previous structures. So that is now all taking place. And as I said in my short introductory remarks, whenever peace talks start to happen, it will be crucial that going forward, Russia has to understand that post those talks, it is impossible for them to again attack Ukraine. So part of the peace talks has to be the exact way of going forward in terms of Ukraine's relationship with NATO, preferably within NATO. But it is, I think, too early now to exactly sketch out what that exactly will mean. Also something we have to discuss with the new incoming US administration. But let's hope that we will get to that point as soon as possible, that we have the luxury of discussing the ongoing security guarantees for Ukraine, because that would mean that we have started into talks and that we have moved to the next phase. And at this moment, clearly Ukraine is not there, because they cannot at this moment negotiate from a position of strength. And we have to do more to make sure, by changing the trajectory of the conflict, that they can get to that position of strength. On standards, totally agree. NATO is strong here. The EU is strong on all the soft power, including the internal market, ramping up defense production. And when it comes to, let's say, industry standards, so from the NATO standards to more industry-specific standards, and sometimes what you will see is that you have 155 ammunition. And you would think that is one particular design for every company which is producing the 155 ammunition, but you would then be amazed how many companies would have some very small specific additions to their system, so that you can only use their 155 ammunition and not generally. So this is something we are working on. And I mentioned already that we have started to work closely together. Of course, we are all colleagues from previous days, so that's easy with Kaja Kallas, with Ursula von der Leyen, with Antonio Costa, but also with the new Defence Commissioner, Kubilius. And one of the things we agreed is that we will set up a high-level coordination group between NATO and the EU. And more specifically, I agreed with Ursula that whenever there is an issue which is not solved in that committee, that she and I will phone each other, and we will only hang up when we have agreed. Even if it takes the whole weekend and we cannot eat in the meantime. So we will have to deal with this issue, and we will have to solve them. And we will. And she is a former defense minister of Germany. We are great friends. So this should work, because we have to make sure that we are in a position of maximum strength vis-à-vis Russia and others, and not spending too much time internally between the EU and NATO when it should be easy to get to an agreement. And that's also an answer to how to get the EU and NATO closer together, more coordination, but light touch, no heavy structures with lots of minutes and meetings and committees. Let's make it as easygoing as possible. so that we can focus on the main salient points and the big issues. On capacity planning, yes, absolutely, we have to work on this. I discussed this with the Defence Commissioner, how to do this, and totally agree on shortening the time to develop new weapon systems. That's particularly crucial that we do that. And we can learn here, of course, from what we see in Ukraine. And Ukraine is extremely fast now at bringing new developments to the battlefield. But Russia is then extremely fast in implementing what Ukraine has just implemented 2 weeks ago. So we are learning from this. And this whole idea that we can in detail describe what a design should look like, including the color and the type of paint you use, etc., is silly. The big risk in EU and NATO is that the better is the enemy of good. And we don't have to go for the 10 on a 1 to 10 scale or for the A+. Sometimes the B is good enough. And speed sometimes is more important than perfection. Then, of course, the new incoming administration, they will start next Monday. We have seen some press conferences, some things being said by some people in the US. But I would say let's take this forward starting from next Monday onwards. What I know from Donald Trump and from the incoming administration is that they were the ones pushing us for more defense spending. They were successful at this, and they were right. I mean, we did not spend enough, and now luckily we are overall close to the 2%. The problem is, of course, that in the meantime the 2% is not enough. And some of you asked me, okay, what should it be? I don't want to commit to a number, but as I said in my Carnegie talk after my speech, when you look, so let's say at a sort of first glance at the capability requirements emerging from the internal planning process within NATO, it will be north of 3%. But then you're right, if you do joint buying and making use of the NSPA, Luxembourg structures and everything else we have within NATO and the EU, you can deduct joint buying, you can deduct innovation. For example, Ukraine is experimenting with new radar systems, which are extremely less expensive than some of the more traditional radar systems to detect enemy missiles coming in. Just one example, if you deduct that, you don't have to get to what we are afraid of you would need now, which is 3.6, 3.7. So you would bring that number somewhat down, but it will be impressively more than the 2% we are at now, I'm afraid. But that is a structured process within NATO. We will conclude it over the coming month with the defense ministers, latest in June before the summit in The Hague. Then on the more autonomous European defense, well, it's great to have a sort of European NATO, but then forget about the 2%. Then you have to bring it up to 8, 9 or 10% if you really want. You have to build your own nuclear capability, and it will take 15, 20 years if you want to build a European NATO without the US. At this moment, the US is spending over 60% of all the money is being spent within NATO territory, over 60%. That means the other 31 are doing less than 40%, including Canada. And so it is an illusion that you can build a European NATO over the next 10 or 15 years. And why would you? I mean, the transatlantic relationship, I think, after the First World War, but particularly after the Second World War, has served us very well. So why would we disconnect from the US? I would be against it. But again, if you want this for ideological reasons, then you have to quadruple or even more your defense spending, and then it will still take you 10 or 15 years. And I agree, better spending always better than more spending, but I think it is both. It is better spending, like making use of the joint procurement, but at the same time we need to do more spending, because simply, when you look what we spent during the Cold War, the levels were north of 3% generally, and the 2% we are now is absolutely not enough. When you look what Russia is producing now in 3 months, it's what the whole of NATO is producing from Los Angeles up to Ankara in a full year. And then Russia is not bigger than the Netherlands and Belgium combined as an economy. The two of you together is the Russian economy. And they are producing in 3 months what the whole of NATO is producing in a year. And don't forget, when you compare Russian numbers, that what you can buy in Russia for the same money is, of course, much more. Because they do not have our high salaries, they don't have our bureaucracy, they can move at a higher speed, and they have basically created a war economy. And their whole industry is now on a war footing. So don't compare their 8 or 9% defense spending, 1/3 of the 8 or 9% of GDP, 1/3 of the whole state budget being spent on defense. When you cobble it all together, it might be less than what the European NATO is doing. But again, you can buy so much more, do so much more, and they have this urgent need to get there. Then opening up the US defense market versus spending more in Europe, it is both. It is absolutely both, because in Europe we have fantastic companies. But for example, on air defense, we still, and on the 5th generation fighter jets, we cannot lose out on the US. So you need both, and there is so much money going around, and this was my argument with Trump, open up the US defense markets, because if you want to buy something in the US, you have to go through the Congress, the White House, the Defense Department, the Pentagon, etc., before you can get your hands on a Patriot system. So make that easier. And at the same time, there is so much money going around that Thales and Rheinmetall and Leonardo and all the fantastic defense companies here in Europe will have plenty of opportunity to put in extra production lines, extra shifts. And by the way, they have to do this. And don't wait for the 10-year contracts they are all asking, because we will not be able to create 10-year contracts. But they know the demand is there for the long term. So please, defense industry, ramp up production and be good businessmen, and don't lose out to the South Koreans, because South Korean is getting into the market. Poland, Romania, Estonia, they are all buying South Korean, because European, American defense companies are not delivering at the speed we need and at the prices we need. Then on, of course, sabotage and all that. And as I said, hybrid, it should be, I think, more towards destabilizing actions by the Russians. And we should do more than just tracking what they are doing. And one of the great things of what will happen tomorrow in Finland, in Helsinki, is that we'll have a meeting discussing how we can counter what the Russians are doing, and also how we can survey the Baltic Sea. And the Russians don't like that we have a bigger NATO presence there. But that is the result of some of these anchor dragging. And if it is really just a mistake of Russians not being able to sail ships, then we should launch a huge initiatives by the EU and NATO to have a huge training course for all Russian sailors to learn how to navigate their ships and experience what it means when your anchor is for 100 miles on the seabed. Then on Trump, yes, he has been right many times. I agree. And he might be right many times in the future. And we have to dialogue with him. And I like the reaction of Mette Frederiksen, the Prime Minister of Denmark, who did not immediately react to what he said about Greenland, but she brought it back to the issue which is at stake, which is the Arctic, and how to make sure that in the Arctic we have a strategic issue to be discussed between NATO, the US, within NATO and the EU, how to deal with the Arctic, etc. And this is not about who rules or controls Greenland. This is, of course, about making sure that the Arctic stays same. So yes, Europe can rely on the United States. I'm absolutely convinced the United States will stay within NATO. I'm not worried about that. But we have to make sure that the argument which the US had in the past, and still can have to a certain extent at this moment, that because of what they are spending, we can spend more on other stuff because they spend it on defense, that we take out that argument by spending more ourselves. And when I say spending more ourselves, yes, it's better spending, joint procurement, innovation, etc. But again, also more spending. The 2%, everything I'm seeing at this moment is not nearly enough. And if we don't do it, we are safe now, but not in 4 or 5 years. So if you don't do it, get out your Russian language courses or go to New Zealand. Or decide now to spend more. And that's exactly the debate we have to finalize over the next 3 or 4 months. To stay safe in this part of the world and defend ourselves. On Eurobonds and all that, that's for the EU. I want you to spend more money. And where you get it from, I had some clear views on this in the past. But I've been forced by the new team to not discuss that any longer. As long as the money is there. Then it's not for, I've never committed to 4%. There was somebody saying, I think it was here that I mentioned 4%. No, I've not committed to a new number. Just saying 2% is not nearly enough. I would say if I was in Bulgaria, I would be very happy to be in NATO. But of course, I accept your argument. but I do not agree. Then on Greenland, Canada, I already went to that. Bosnia, I already went to that. Then on, I think, finally, Turkey. Well, in 2016, it was Turkey with Germany, and the Dutch were then heading the European Union Council, UCO, and we were able to come to a deal with the Turks in the Syrian refugee crisis. And I was very happy with that, because that made it possible to bring down the numbers of Syrians coming into Germany, Sweden, and the Netherlands, because particularly you remember the then chair of the European Parliament saying, Viktor Orban saying, nobody wants to go to Hungary, they all want to go to Germany. And that's true. And in 2016, we risked that the number would reach 1 million. But because of this deal with Turkey, it did not. And I've always felt that Turkey is a worthwhile member of NATO, playing its role, and yes, also defending its interests, like everybody here is defending its interests. Within the EU and within NATO, and that's fine. But they're a very valuable member of the alliance. And then maybe finally on the eastern flank, one of the things I learned, Madam, is that yes, I'm happy with the forward land forces, etc. So all the initiatives we have now to secure the 8 countries, including now Finland, on the eastern flank. But at the same time, let's never forget that in the end, we have to also, at the same time, message towards the Russians that whenever you would decide to attack us, it is not only the Latvian military which will fight you back, not only the forward land forces, it will be the whole of NATO, including our mighty navy, our mighty land forces, our fighter jets, which will take you out. So not even dare to take 1 square kilometer of Latvia. And when you say you are on the eastern flank, it is The Hague, London and New York at the eastern flank. Latvia, yes, maybe physically, but we are all on the eastern flank. We are all in this together. There are no first or second class citizens in NATO and the EU. It's really crucial that we understand this and that our collective defense is really collective and connected. So I think I tried to answer as many questions as possible.
Thank you, Secretary General. Dear Mark Rutte, thank you for this valuable exchange of views. It was a real pleasure to have you here today. Colleagues, may I ask the coordinators to remain in the room? Our coordinators meeting will start in 1 or 2 minutes. Our meeting is now closed. Thank you very much, and once again, thank you, Secretary General.